Greetings, and thank you for joining us for another SANS ICS Concept Overview. I'm Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security and a certified SANS instructor. In this concept overview, we're joined by Don Brown, Associate Director of Cybersecurity at Verista. Don is here to discuss his experiences deploying a secure OT network architecture. He walks us through a presentation that outlines his approach to achieving good zones and conduits to implement a reliable and secure operating environment. If you enjoy this video and topics we cover in the SANS ICS concept overviews, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment if you have a question about this topic or suggestions for future content. Hello and welcome back to the SANS ICS concept videos. Today we're joined by Don Brown, the Associate Director of Cybersecurity at Verista. Don's here to speak to us about secure architectures and control environments. Don, thank you for coming on. And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I grew up from the industrial controls area. That was my chosen profession. I always kept one foot in IT because I had those computer skills. I had those networking skills. And as I grew in my career, I realized that I wanted to do more in the IT sector. So I got my master's degree it was in computer science with a specialization in computer system security. I was able to take that and use my background in industrial automation and kind of grow that into my OT life. And of course, in OT, it really leads to operational technology, very much leads right into cybersecurity. Because the first thing when you're running a network, the very first thing you have to do is protect.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to it, why don't I just let you go at it. So please talk to us about network architecture. I'll go ahead and start off the first slide.
Yeah, go right ahead. So when we talk about OT network architecture, we're talking about controlling our risk. Some of the simplest things that we can do up front. Many presentations will tell you kind of the what behind it. I'm going to tell you how. Now, one of the things I like to start off with is a couple of key quotes that I've found that really kind of bring things into focus. The cost of a data breach. Now, again, this is from October of last year, so just a few months ago. The cost of a data breach, $4.2 million, and that's average. Some are higher, some are lower. But it's 287 days to identify and clean up. So if it took 3 months to clean up, that means they were in your system for 6 months unabated before it was even identified. So I find that quote to be absolutely sobering, very, very incredible results there that they found. Also, that one of the biggest fears of us in OT are ransomware, and I think that's true in IT as well. But it has increased incredibly. It's gone up to 61.2% compared to last year. In that, what they're also doing is this kind of the name and shame tactics here, right? So they like to put your name out there, say, we got whatever the company name is. And it's embarrassing to the company, yes, but what it does is it affects your credibility as an organization.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I'm seeing. I always talk about branding, and how big of a risk it is to organizations, and the approach that they take to it. Trying to keep things quiet, and certainly that is important. Keeping things quiet, not letting the adversaries, the threat actors, know what you know. At least containing that as much as possible. But at the same time, a lot of times it bottles up that information so that the industry does not benefit from the experiences and stuff like that. So,
that is branding. That is a great point. Great point. I'm a big fan of the CIS controls. I found that there's a lot of people in industry that just don't know about them. They're more than willing to implement them once they learn about them, but they just don't know about them. Mm-hmm. A study of these CIS controls found that if you just implement the first 5 controls, you knock out 85% of the cyber incidents. You will have been able to get around. It's not all of them, but at least it's a good start. You can go on to the next slide. So the why. In December of 2021, CISA reported 420 vulnerabilities. CISA is the component for cybersecurity of the of DHS, right, of the Department of Homeland Security. 16 high risk, 60 medium, 13 lows. You can see those there. 313 were yet unassigned. They just haven't been evaluated yet. And then when you get to the OT question is who's minding the store? Who's taking care of this? If this is what the attack theater looks like, who's taking care of it? Corporate IT, a lot of times they've been told don't touch the OT network. So it's not their job. I'm not a big fan of people that say it's not my job, but sometimes it wasn't their choice to say that. Automation engineers, hey, too busy keeping the plant running. I'm out, running around, touching the machines, making sure that we're closing work orders and things like that. I'm too busy to keep the plant running, or I just don't have those skills. Mm-hmm. And so what we find is who is minding the store? Nobody's looking at it. Very few systems are truly air gapped. So anybody that's saying, oh, well, we don't have to worry about it because our systems are air gapped. Yeah, you got to look at that very carefully. It's true that there are some, but they're very few and far between. And then many attacks on OT networks just start with being able to access the system. It's been said that once they get access to the network, it's all over, because a lot of these components, PLC will accept the command if you send it to it correctly. But I think that just controlling that access, first of all, is a great way to start. And that all comes down to architecture.
Yeah, and that's, there's so much to unpack from this, certainly starting with the who's minding the store and stuff like that. Different in every organization, really depends on if you're small or large, whether you've outsourced stuff, to managed service providers. A lot of the managed service providers do provide IT support in these areas, but they don't understand the processes. So they do just the bare minimum to get everything installed and allow other people to make modifications if that's what they want. They'll do what they're asked to do, but nobody really understands necessarily. They don't have the skills of defining some of those requirements. Certainly that's changing, but hopefully vendors and other people with hardening guides and so forth will start providing a little bit better information so that we can give that information to the people that are supporting those environments, whether it's managed service providers, the IT team, or even the automation engineers.
You bring up a good point there, and these two who's minding the store, I don't mean to disparage anybody. I think these people come in and they want to do a good job. They try to do a good job. They put everything into it that they possibly can. It's just sometimes the corporate IT guys have been told don't touch it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the automation engineers, like you said, depending on the size of the company, maybe there's been attrition, maybe there's been just the overwhelming amount of work to do before they can ever sit down at their desk and say, hey, let's take a look at the security.
Awesome. The next one.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Now, this is where the how comes in. What we will need to do is separate those industrial control systems from the enterprise network. So if anybody is watching this, or anybody is seeing this for the first time, if your control systems are connected to the business network, same network you get your email on, the ones you use to chat with people, ones that you use to access the internet, separate it as quickly as you can. We need to segregate it off because it's a special network. We need a separate OT firewall. We cannot have any internet access on it. Remember, the attacks, a lot of them just start with being able to get to the stuff. We want to use remote access through jump servers. So if you're sitting at your desk on your corporate laptop, you could still access remotely, but we're going to go through a secure series of servers. We want a separate domain controller. We do not want to be tied into the IT network domain controller. Why? Well, the biggest reason right there is if the IT domain controller were ever compromised, now your OT network is compromised as well. Backup and restore is a key part. A lot of people are really, really good at backup. They never test the restores. One of the things I've been a proponent of, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, is when you test your restores, don't restore to production. Restore to a test or development network. Sometimes that's a little harder, depending on what it needs, but there are ways to set up isolated virtual LANs within your network to say, hey, we're just going to back up or we're just going to restore to this one area. If we can restore and it boots up and all that, then we know we're fine and we can move on with our life. Trying to restore to production puts your production at risk. Antivirus and endpoint protection. Again, a lot of people are really good at this. This has really come a long way on, just in OT in general. A lot of those engineering laptops that you see running around, the ones that really aren't taken care of by IT, now we're even starting to see endpoint protection on those. Separate your systems by function. I'll show you a little bit of that. Again, it's specific to the pharmaceutical industry, but you'll get my point when we talk about it. Create that development or test area, right? Make sure that you've got that on your network so that you can get information in and out of it as needed, but it's isolated so that you're not controlling any machines or anything like that from it. And then secure your area for your business critical data. This is different for every organization, but I talk in terms of the databases, and the file servers are probably the two most prominent areas of that. We just want to make sure that, number one, they're in a good place. We know they're backed up. We're not spread out all over, and we've got them locked down as much as we can for the applications.
Absolutely. I like your list here. It seems to hit all of the things that I'm used to talking about and providing guidance on, and certainly the industry has as well. Probably some of the biggest things that I see that aren't mentioned here. I mean, but we can make this list so big. Asset management, understanding your assets, doing an inventory, understanding where things are supposed to go. Certainly, if once you start architecting, you should have a good understanding of what your assets are and where they're deployed, who's responsible for them, and so forth. And then certainly centralized logging. That's always going to be a big thing in my mind, one of the top things. Understanding that so that you can get the information where it needs to go, start planning that centralized logging, especially for some of that authentication that you're talking about, starting there, understanding who's authenticating and coming in remotely is going to tell you a lot when you start thinking about bad things that are going on within these environments. But I think this is a great start. I do kind of like the order of it too, because that's usually kind of typically where we go in the order of making recommendations. So this is a good list.
And you brought up some very good points there, Don. I could have made this list, so long, but the font started getting
right. Absolutely. But certainly, yeah, these are good things to bring up and think about. Start that conversation when we're planning for these things, because if we don't take some of these things into considerations, we're going to make decisions as we're going forward. And some of the things that I think you're going to talk about in a second, we're not going to address some of the issues that for these things while we're making those other decisions. So it's good to identify a lot of this stuff up front.
Yeah. And, you bring up a good point about different industries is that, your plant may only make chocolate bunnies for Easter. It still needs this. It still needs to be protected, because if you can't manufacture those chocolate bunnies, your company is not going to make any money.
Yeah, and a lot of the SANS instructors were talking about when they started talking about the ransomware stuff, and it really kind of, I like to think I think about the engineers and so forth. When they're talking about ransomware, they were really making the point that when somebody's taken down and not operational, all the people that support that stuff, while you might have IT staff that are taking care of a lot of these things, everybody else who's working who can't work, they're just sitting back, and
that's right.
They're not working on anything. And the way they get paid, a lot of them are getting paid by the hour. If they're not working, they're not getting paid. So
they didn't have anything to do with it.
Exactly.
It's not their fault, and there's really not a whole lot they can do to help. I'm sure they'd be willing to jump in and help wherever they were asked, but yeah, it's a tough one because it's not their fault, and it's very little they can do to help.
Yes, sir. So I'm glad we're talking about secure architecture
Hmm.
for these organizations. You ready
Yeah,
for the next one?
yeah, go on.
Awesome.
So again, with my promise to show you how, we're going to start with something you've seen a lot is the Purdue Network, right? The Purdue Network has been around for a long time. It just describes these different levels. I've laid it out to show you where the enterprise network sits, what's in it, the IT switches, the IT firewall, the router. Basically, it's the path to the internet. Level 3 to 3.5 starts off with the OT network firewall. This is what shuts off things like access to the internet, right? So yes, we can communicate to the enterprise network, in certain instances, but we're not giving unfettered access to the internet. Uh, or I should say corporate network, not the internet there. Then you've got your core switches, and this is where you have your infrastructure of like your servers, virtual machines, storage, mass storage, things like that. I had one other thing that I was going to put on here and talk about, and that this is also the level that you would put like a time server. Uh, in the pharmaceutical industry, time is huge because everything that you do has to be contemporaneous. So if you write down that, hey, I did something at 3:01 p.m., usually you're looking up at the plant clock, which is tied to a time server that is on this level. Some people I've seen put them on the corporate level. I'm not a big fan of that. I would rather have them down in the industrial control network in the OT level.
And to me, I think that really boils down to requirements. What does the business need? Do they need that to be associated? Certainly, coming up with different stratums and so forth. But I wouldn't trust anything that's coming from the corporate network, especially if time is so important for some of those deterministic type of decisions and so forth. So
Right.
absolutely, I would rather see that implemented separately within these environments, set
Yeah,
up properly with different stratums.
I
So
completely
one of
agree.
one of the questions that I have, and probably a lot of people that don't work in this industry or coming in from the IT, is we talk about it, a lot of people are used to talking about subnets and so forth. But when you go look at Purdue models, look at 62443, they start talking about zones and conduits. So can you describe what that relationship is for us?
I actually show that on the next slide.
Okay. Do you
Uh,
want to go there now, or did you have
so
an?
yeah, I think we've got the point of this slide. So let's go
Okay.
over there and talk about this because this is hugely important. You say, Don, you've got your OT firewall in there. How do you set this up? How do you make sure that this is solid? Well, the very first thing that you need is a DMZ, a demilitarized zone. The servers that are in the DMZ can talk to the office network or the enterprise network, and it can talk down to the control zones that are shown below. I separate my DMZ into at least two zones where I've got the infrastructure servers and then I've got the access servers. The only difference there is the access servers, those are the ones that people interact with. The infrastructure servers are things like where you would do, any emails that are going out. So like maybe SCADA alarms going out through an email server. Your Windows updates might come down through there. Things like that. Your remote access, all that stays in the infrastructure. The DMZ access would just be where the users kind of touch.
And just for clarification, we see this, and I don't know if everybody's going to be able to see this, the mice, but on the top is the bubble with the office network, and you're considering that the plant network. So a level 4 environment, level 4, level 5,
Right.
and then these two bubbles, the two bubbles underneath that are in that big red block. We have the IDMZ infrastructure and then IDMZ access. So that would be the DMZs that you're talking about, often referred to as level 3.5. Actually, I think the 62443 has now been updated to include that as a designation. So that's what you're talking about right there. Is that correct?
Exactly. That is
Okay.
exactly right. And then what we do is we start to split off our zones down below. Again,
Okay.
I like to have an infrastructure zone. These are all the things that are solid and consistent. We're going to see on the next slide what kind of servers would go in there, but all of the things that are needed to kind of support all of the rest of the zones.
Mhm.
I've got one for manufacturing because we had a plant that was specific to manufacturing equipment. We had our BMS, our all of our air handlers, all the controls for doors and security access, all those kind of things were in our building management system. And so that's what that zone is. Then we had some quality control labs. And because of the FDA restrictions, we had to keep that separate. And then we had these MSAT labs. This is material sciences and technologies. And this was very closely tied into the QC labs, but none of it's GMP. So we separated that off into another zone. And then, of course, you see my development zone. That's my playground. That's where I like to go in and do what we want. Now, you'll see that this is all based on a Palo Alto next generation firewall. I'm not married to Palo Alto. It doesn't have anything to do with the brand. The next generation part is key because there's so many things you can do in here. You can see that everything is in all the brick walls around these zones, which means anytime you cross from one zone into another zone, you create a conduit.
Okay.
And that conduit is based on port numbers and protocols and all that kind of stuff. So if you need to talk from the IDMZ infra zone into the CZ manufacturing zone, you need a firewall rule.
So
if you need to talk to manufacturing to BMS, you need a firewall rule. Those are your conduits.
So the firewall that you're using to separate everything from your plant network, that's the same firewall that's managing all of your level 3 environment to
Yes.
include the DMZ. Okay, I mean
Yes.
that makes
Now,
sense. And obviously this is probably a dual firewall pair that are
yes.
for primary and secondary.
Active, passive, yeah, but yeah, exactly. Primary and secondary. Could you put a firewall here and a firewall here and have your DMZ in between? Absolutely, you can. What I did was I try to be, sensitive to cost. When it goes into this, a lot of times these projects aren't very well funded because it's easy to find money for the IT network, but the OT network seems to be built on the back of automation projects. So, the next time a new manufacturing line comes in, they say, okay, let's add some switches, let's do some upgrades.
Right.
So
yeah,
I try to be.
It depends on the size of the organization, that the approach they're going to take. I would imagine that a lot of large organizations, probably this is the level 3 part of the environment might be done either through another firewall or probably through some type of routing infrastructure, ACL configurations and so forth for the different conduits that you're talking about.
Yes.
To manage the different zones and the different conduits, and that's basically what it is, right? Each one of these blocks is a different zone, and then the conduits are the communication paths that are defined by that networking infrastructure, whether a router or a firewall. Is that correct?
That is exactly right.
Okay, awesome. Ready to go?
Yep. On the next slide,
okay,
you will see kind of what servers go where.
Interesting.
Now, this looks like a great big mess here, but first of all, you see down at the very bottom, you see your servers. Now, I had 2 sets of servers. We had a 2 clusters that were supporting the entire network because our systems were just that large. Could this all be done on one set of servers? Absolutely, it can be. But all of our virtual machines fit into a zone. None of them were outside of a zone. The ones that were in the IBMZ infra were things that, again, people would communicate with in terms of the very first one that you see over there is how you would do password resets. Now, how you manage your identity on the control network. The next one is a secure file transfer. It allows files to be uploaded to a server, virus scanned, and then sent down into the control zone. You can also do it the other way. The next one over is the one with the check mark is our WUSA server, our Windows Update server. And again, it can grab updates from the Office network and use it to actually update the servers and workstations that are in the control zone.
So from this, this
ahead.
is an example of your implementation within the organization, or an example of it,
Yeah.
right? So you
Yes.
have successfully implemented some of those update servers,
Yeah.
AV, and basically these servers are going to be, they're communicating with those external services on the internet, whether it's Microsoft. I'll pick Semantic as the antivirus. Those are pulling patches down here. And then you have additional servers in level 3 that are just reaching up to those servers and pulling down what you've asked them to pull down. Would that be
That
correct?
that is a very good way to put it. But you'll notice those port numbers on there,
Yes, sir.
the 443. Yeah, those are the port numbers that's the only port that the traffic is allowed to and from.
Okay.
So to me, that's very important. That I had a one server that was implemented. It was a backup server, and nobody really knew how it worked. And so at one point, we just opened up the entire firewall to it. We just said, okay, let this thing talk to whatever it needs to talk to, and we'll close it down later. Bad move. It worked, but later when we reviewed those rules and we went, oh my gosh, we forgot about this one, we were able to get in the documentation. We had a lot more understanding of what it did and how it did it, and we were able to close it down. So yeah, definitely not the way to go. You just blow open it's much better to understand it, but sometimes you have to let it go first and then close it down later. I don't like that approach, but it happens.
So, and just for clarification, because people are going to look at this, we have 2 servers that have lines going to some other system within the business network. So I would assume that is associated with business applications that are permitted to communicate. The other lines that aren't pointing over there, those are actually going out to the internet. Would that be accurate?
Not to the internet, just to the office network. So
okay, so do you have an additional server, patch management, and stuff like that that's in the office network as well?
Exactly. So the server in the office network would download the patches from Microsoft. Our server would download from that server. No, we would not actually touch Microsoft.com.
Were you worried about that being an easy way to hop
yes.
through your corporate network into your DMZ, into the area? I mean, was that
absolutely just like any port that you open up externally, you're going to have those issues, right? You're going to have those concerns, because could there be a supply chain attack from Microsoft? Absolutely, there could be. Did we have that problem? No, we didn't. We didn't run into it. But I always throw the word "yet" on the end of that. Yes, it hasn't happened yet. So the other one you'll see there, the mail server, you'll notice that we only send information out. We do not bring information back in through the mail server. That's just too dangerous. The one over in the DMZ access, you'll see the one with all the different lines. What those are jump servers. Now, this is mostly for load balancing, but the idea is when the user logs in to the web interface, which is that first server in IDMZ access, and then it will just send it over to the different jump servers. With maybe we have one for manufacturing, one for the QC labs, one for MSAT. It just helps balance that load across the organization, so we don't have everybody on one server.
Awesome, excellent.
Down in the infrastructure, one of the biggest things that I will point out here are the file server, the secure file server, and you'll see the SQL Server cluster that has high availability groups to make sure that the great thing about that is you can reboot one server and the other server takes over. So this is great for updates and maintenance and things like that, and just it helps kind of give you that fail safe. You'll also notice the time server is in infrastructure. That's what all the clocks are connected to. That's what all the other virtual machines look at to get its time from. The manufacturing network, again, you see a couple of Rockwell Automation servers there. You'll also notice that it has its own Active Directory server. Why? You've already got your Active Directory server over in infrastructure. Well, the idea is if something were compromised, we could shut off those different conduits that go to the CZ manufacturing zone, isolate it, and people can still work. We're still making parts, right? We're still making medications. Same thing with the BMS. We can keep the air handlers running if we isolate. Same thing with the QC lab. All those instruments that are collecting information and data and sending information to the servers, all of that becomes isolated. So that's the reason that you do this, because again, every time you make a connection, you create those conduits. Those conduits can also be turned off, which helps secure your network.
Yeah, and I like this. I mean, there's so many good examples around this. Some things that a lot of people don't necessarily take into consideration. We do, obviously, people tuning in are probably thinking about how are people deploying their certain assets. But even though you're a pharmaceutical manufacturer, the importance of some of the other technologies and industrial control environments, the role that it plays in that pharmaceutical process. Obviously, you have sub processes down that are doing things, whether they're mixing chemicals and so forth. But that BMS, your control, environmental controls are extremely important to ensure that everything is stored correctly, that and so forth. And that can have an impact. Somebody gets, if you're not managing your environmental control systems from your control environment, and it's a critical part of it, then potentially somebody can come in. I've seen a lot of organizations that are still doing that from their corporate network and haven't isolated it within their control network. So it looks like that you guys thought about that risk and took that into consideration when you're deploying this.
Oh, very much so. One of the attacks that I like to point to is the target attack, where they actually came in, the attackers came in through the one of these BMS controllers, and it was because it had a default password set in it. How easy is that to do, right? A system integrator comes in, sets up your air handler, everything's working. Okay, we got the temperatures and the humidities, which is what everybody is looking for. Everything's set. Okay, this works great. And they leave and forget about it. And that controller is sitting there running perfectly well, but it has a default password in it. And the only way you find that is through what you talked about earlier, through that system inventory, through logging into it, taking a look at it. What has those default passwords in it, and change them.
Yeah, and a lot of people are starting to do some of the threat modeling around that. There's a new program that's coming out of Idaho National Labs, and I'm going to butcher it. I mean, it's called CCE. I can't remember what it's called, but it's taking into consideration the actual consequences for each one of these, looking at every one of these. As you've outlined zones right now, and saying, okay, what's the impact of this on everything, and then really using that to help to prioritize some of the efforts and so forth. But certainly, we're talking about architecture here. That's a critical part, and having this set up and split out so that things are isolated to their appropriate areas, so there's no cross communications unless it's absolutely necessary. I think that's extremely important. I'm glad you outlined it, but I have to ask, where are your centralized logging servers? Where's your Windows logging? Where's that in here?
I will say it's all in there. The diagram that I had was completely populated, and it would have taken me. I could have talked about it for hours, but I had to kind of pare it down to just the pieces that I wanted to focus on. But yes, it is all in there in the original design.
Yeah,
Great question.
Yeah, it looks like you guys have taken a lot of things into consideration,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm sure we can drill into it a lot more. Anything else about this, though?
What you've got set up here now is a secure architecture that you can easily defend. Mm-hmm. So when they come out with the latest, I'll use the Log4j or Log4j, depending on how you want to pronounce it, attack. With a setup like this, first of all, it's easier to find, it's easier to defend, it's going to be harder for somebody to exploit, simply because you've controlled all those different aspects. You've really shrunk down your attack surface. And all you did was architecture. Mm-hmm. Like you said, we've hit on a couple of times in this. There's a whole lot more that we can talk about. But just with architecture, you've now set up a solid foundation on which to build.
I like that word, foundation. I think that's extremely important. So is that it?
That's it.
Awesome. Well, Don, I really appreciate that quick overview of your considerations for a secure architecture. I like the fact that you kind of highlighted some of the lessons learned that you've had, that your teams have implemented and drawn across. So do you have any final statements? And when you're done, please let us know where we can get in contact with you.
Absolutely. We just like we've talked about here, everybody has been learning and growing as they've started on their journey, whether you started in the IT area, whether you started in the controls area, and you've come to this point where now you're looking into the OT cybersecurity, and it's a great field. One thing I've talked to Don about before is everybody is so willing to help each other. We're all willing to talk to each other about this. And I think that's fantastic. It's an awesome community. So if you want to reach out, you can reach me. It's just don.brown@verista.com. So it makes it real easy. I can't get that too wrong there, Don, right?
Right. I can, but you shouldn't.
But absolutely, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help. I've done mentoring for younger engineers. I've also been able to work through different customers to say, let's just take a look at what you've got. I'm not a big rip and replace guy. Let's just take a look at what you've got and see if we can make it a little bit better.
Awesome. That's excellent. We'll have links to everything. Hopefully we can get the this up on the Verista's website so that people can download it and look at it a little bit more closely. But we will get all of that in the show notes. So once again, Don, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And you have a great day, sir.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to another concept overview with the SANS ICS and Cutaway security teams. Please let us know if there are other topics you would like us to cover in the comments below. If you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe to the SANS ICS YouTube channel. This has been Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security. Go forth and do good things.